Hey, welcome again to X Garage. Again, I'm Jake the Snake, and we got Nathan here with us telling his testimony about growing up in the Jehovah's Witness Church. How you doing again, Nathan?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing just fine. So we were going to talk a little bit. You said it was something about the your baptism in the last episode. So why don't you just pick it up from right there?
Yeah, that'll work. Being a sexual abuse survivor and dealing with all of the other types of pressures that you have as a young person growing up, and the pressure to perform for the organization, the pressure from your parents, keeping the secret of being abused, and any other sins that I thought that I was committing as a kid, whether that be, lying or taking money out of my parents' purse to go play video games or buy candy or whatever, was all weighing upon me. Um, the Jehovah's Witnesses typically start to prime their children for baptism around 12. And to be baptized is to show that you're part of a strong Jehovah's Witness family if you're a young person and you're baptized. If you're a young person and you're not baptized, and then the next question that everyone is asking secretly in the congregation and sometimes even publicly is, well, why not? Why aren't you baptized? Do you not want to dedicate your life to Jehovah? Unfortunately, with baptism, it's not a dedication to God, it's a dedication to the organization. And so one of the things that Jehovah's Witnesses kind of softly teach, is that baptism is a washing of your sins, and it is sort of a way to get right with Jehovah and to start a fresh slate and dedicate your life to Him and be able to basically serve Him until the end of the world, or until you die. So what I decided to do after quite a bit of coaching and pressure from friends, family, parents, all of that, was I'm just going to take this weight of sin off of me by going ahead and getting baptized. And I think at around 15 years old, I have some pictures in the other room of my baptism. I got baptized at a circuit, I think it was a circuit assembly, if I remember correctly. So there's two types of assemblies. There's a circuit assembly and a district convention. The circuit assembly, there's a circuit of congregations and they all meet together. And so that'll be like a couple thousand people. Then there's the district convention that used to be up to like 5,000 or 6,000 people sometimes. And those would be held in big arenas or things like that. Just a little tidbit of information. So I got baptized, and immediately after I got baptized, I felt some relief, but I really didn't feel very much relieved. And in fact, I felt the pressure was on even more to perform, because now all the eyes are on you. You're the elder son, you're baptized. What's the next step? The next step is you're going to Bethel, or you're going to become a pioneer and go into full-time door-to-door preaching work, or you're going to, grow in some way within the ranks of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And every Jehovah's Witness, and I do mean every Jehovah's Witness, including my lovely, faithful mom and dad, my grandmother that's passed, all of these people lead what is called a double life. There is the Jehovah's Witness that everyone sees, and there's the real person. Mm-hmm. And whenever you are trying to put on a front in front of everyone else, and you know that you don't feel the same, that you are a different person when you're not around them, that in itself weighs on you pretty heavily too. So as a kid, we listened to secular music. Secular music might have had profanity in it. That was stuff that you hid in your room, and you only listened to it at night after everyone went to bed. Watching rated R movies, you would go over to someone's house and watch a rated R movie. And I will say the rated R movies back in the 80s and 90s weren't probably near as bad as the ones that are out now, but it was still, inappropriate material to watch. And so, it had profanity in it, or would have a nudity scene in it or something like that. one or two scenes that were bad or violent or whatever. And so you would hide these type of things. And there was different classes of Jehovah's Witnesses. So some of my friends' parents were considered weaker in the faith because they didn't dedicate to the extent that maybe my parents did or others in the congregations did. So if you went over to their house, you knew you could get away with more because they weren't really paying attention, or they didn't have as much issue letting their kids play this video game or that, or watch this movie or that movie. So that's leading to double life. But it even goes further though, because Jehovah's Witnesses, they know that there's this constant system of, I like to call it, simplest word, tattletelling, because there's a policy in the Jehovah's Witnesses that is communicated that says that if you know someone's in sin and you don't report it, and Armageddon comes tomorrow, you're going to be held blood guilty for it before Jehovah.
Wow.
So it's encouraged for the other members, if they start to notice things about another member, to go to the elders and tell it. And so everybody's on guard, and everybody's putting on this face, and everybody's basically fake within the organization when it gets right down to the deepest part of who they are. They talk about closeness, and they talk about how these are my brothers and sisters, and we have a bond that no churches have and that no other people on the earth have. But the truth is most of them don't know who the real people are when they say that they're friends with a person. So that's kind of like what it was like growing up in my teenage years. And then there was the fact that my friends, even though they were friends, they knew I was an elder son. And they knew that I was not only an elder son, but I was the presiding overseer's son. So I didn't get invited to certain things, because what if he told? What if his parents found out? So I was kind of excluded from some things. I was not necessarily in the cool crowd. And then just the fact that in a lot of instances, there's not a whole lot of young people around your age. Maybe they were older and they were already getting into some stuff that they probably shouldn't have been getting into, and they didn't want to include the younger person because the younger person might tell. So that was kind of what it was like growing up as a teenager. And then the door-to-door ministry in itself is it can be very brutal. I don't want to talk bad or give any disparaging remarks too much about Christians, but there are so-called Christians that just are not nice whenever the Jehovah's Witnesses come to the door. So growing up as a kid, I heard all kinds of things. I heard, you're going to hell. Well, that might be true, that a person that believes in cultic beliefs may be on their way to hell, but to hear it the way that it was said was not in a loving way and not very nice. You're from the devil. I heard that. You are a devil worshiper, things of that nature. And then people would sick their dogs on you. In our area, dogs were off leash. We lived in the country. People would sick their dogs on you, or they'd just leave the dog around where it could, come up and start to try to bite at you, growl at you, bark at you, or scare you, hoping that you would leave. And then my dad, actually, when I was a kid, I remember one time he actually got assaulted at a door. A man threw a punch at him, and it caught the edge of his face and knocked his glasses off. And thankfully, he didn't get hit or didn't get in any kind of scuffle or fight. And, people spit on us. I mean, but when all of this stuff happens, it just kind of reinforces in the Jehovah's Witness mindset that you're being persecuted because you have the truth. They use this word, the truth, constantly. And that's drilled into their members' head. Where are you going to go? Because if you go anywhere, how can you leave the truth? How can you argue with the truth? How can you disagree with the truth? You're being persecuted for the truth. So that word carries a ton of weight for Jehovah's Witnesses. So when they talk to you as a Christian and you try to tell them the truth about Jesus, the real Jesus, they're already like, we have the truth. Why do we need to listen to this? This is lies from the devil. And so that's how they actually think. That's why a lot of them will shut down when you start to minister to them, because they don't want to hear it. They don't want to get into these issues. And they don't want to talk about the scriptures. Most of the time when they come to the door, they're looking for people that are suitable for conversion. And the way that it's told to the members, my dad has no clue what he's involved in, I don't think, even as an elder. And my mom definitely doesn't. They really sincerely are great people and believe that by going door to door, they are saving people's lives. And the sad thing is they've studied with hundreds of people and brought them into the organization. So, but
wow.
yeah.
Yeah, so obviously spent a lot of time not just studying, but being active with your parents in ministry. So you put your feet to where your mouth was, so to speak.
Yeah.
So start telling us a little bit about you've told me that you love James White. He's my guy. I listen to as much of his stuff as I can. So can you kind of walk us through? You've spent all this time dedicating your life to the Jehovah's Witness organization, and just kind of walk us through this. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so around 18, I started getting really just depressed and just tired of being a Jehovah's Witness. I was burnt out. I just couldn't deal with it. It had been 3 years since I'd been baptized, and I just couldn't deal with it. So one time when I was 18, my parents at the time, they enrolled me in a community college. The Jehovah's Witnesses came out in their Watchtower and said that it was okay to go to trade school or community college because they don't actually like or encourage people to go to a 4-year school or higher because they could probably learn something that would make them turn away from the Jehovah's Witnesses. So I'd started going to community college. I'd started getting my eyes open because even at the community college, we had sociology and psychology classes. And I had to take sociology as an elective. And that professor really opened my eyes to a lot of things. And so I finally told my parents about the sexual abuse. They kind of just blew it off, said that they, didn't want to basically, well, my mom, she at first said something about we need to get this, this family member arrested. And then I was glad I told them, and I just wanted it to be over with and not hear about it anymore, get it off my chest kind of thing. My dad was pretty quick to say, well, we don't want to do anything that will, kind of bring reproach on Jehovah's name, meaning the organization. So it is what it is. It happened, and we just left it gone. And that person was long gone. He wasn't living in the area anymore. We didn't know how to find him, things like that. So after that, I went to college, kind of did the 2-year associate's degree, got a little older, and it was just too much. And I just moved out. And so, of course, I moved out. And when I moved out, I got a job in a town over Charlotte, about 45 minutes away from my parents' house, and started kind of living by myself. And obviously went to another congregation over there. And then I got a couple Jehovah's Witness roommates. One came from the congregation that I grew up in, and the other one came from the new congregation. They had moved into town. And so got a couple roommates. I was actually working for the Jehovah's Witness presiding overseer of the congregation that I was attending. So a guy in the same position as my dad's role. And then another presiding overseer was his boss that he reported to. And it was an actual corporation that I was working for. They just happened to have both got hired under this structure. And I met a couple girls and started hanging out in some bars and things like that with some of the people that I used to go to college with. And I fell into sin. I committed fornication. Started dating a girl that wasn't in the Jehovah's Witness church. And ultimately that led to me getting disfellowship, which means excommunicated. And the funny thing is the presiding overseer that was my boss was the one that led the judicial hearing that ultimately got me disfellowshipped. And immediately after I got kicked out, I lost pretty much everything. All my friends, all my family, all of them cut me off. And then they actually worked it out to where I lost my job too, because I had issues with coping with the depression and the stress, and my performance at my job kind of slacked, and I lost my job. They got me fired. And from there, my Jehovah's Witness roommates moved out, and in the course of about 2 or 3 weeks, I lost everything, every person that I ever knew, a way to take care of myself, even couldn't afford the place that I was living in.
Hmm.
And so then I became very suicidal.
Wow.
And wanted to commit suicide, which unfortunately happens to a lot of the Jehovah's Witnesses that leave. They end up committing suicide.
Yeah.
So it got really serious. For me, in God's providence, a sister in the congregation that I was friends with that was older, that had some psychology training because she went to trade school. I think she went for physical therapy. She saw the signs and checked me into a facility. So I went into like a temporary 1 or 2 week kind of psychological eval. And when I came out, I wasn't as suicidal anymore. From there, I moved well, I'd stayed in my apartment for a little while, but then I ended up moving to Florida. Met a guy in a bar playing pool at a pool table. Guy said he was around my age, said he was a painter, said he was moving back home to Florida, wanted a roommate, did I want to come? And nothing was keeping me there. I was about to lose my place. So I was just like, sure, let's go. From there, got involved in a lot of drugs and other types of really bad things, and just kind of lived life as if I didn't care. And I hated God, and rightfully so, because the God that I knew at that time was not a God that is a loving God, but that was a God that had conditional love, because the condition for anyone to love me at that time was that I was a Jehovah's Witness, and I didn't want to be one anymore. So I went on for a little while like that, and an event happened that kind of woke me up. I was involved with some bad people, and the guy had basically took my car and joyrided in it while I was asleep, passed out from partying, and ended up hitting an old lady coming home from Disney World, because we were living in the Orlando area. Hit her in his car, in my car, injured her really badly, and then ran from the scene of the accident. So I had an issue with the insurance company and legal issue. And at the time, my roommate had already moved out as well, down in Florida. And I was about to be homeless again. So it's funny how God's providence works, because I had met 3 people in a nightclub that I had went to in downtown Orlando only one time, exchanged phone numbers with them. They were coming out of the military, a little bit older than me, and they were wanting to start a business. And so right at the last minute, when I felt like I was about to lose everything, power had been cut off, there was little food in the house, I had no roommate, I get a phone call, and they're like, hey, we want you to come work for us.
Wow.
And I'm like, why? Like, what do you want from me? And they were like, well, computers. And at the time I was doing IT work, and they was like, we need you to help set up our office and run our computer systems and things like that. And I was like, I don't even have a car, guys, and I'm about to lose my place if I'm leveling with you. They're like, oh, well, it just so happens that one of our guys, actually 2 of our guys, need a place to live, so we're going to move in, and we'll take you to work.
Wow.
And so that's what they did. And then the funny thing, in addition to that, is they said, well, we can't pay you because we're starting the company, but we'll feed you and we'll take you to work and we'll pay your rent. And so I lived with them for a good 4 or 5 months, and then I moved back home. And then I met my wife, first wife, and I was only like 22, 23. It was a terrible marriage. It was really bad, just very young. But I straightened up. I didn't do drugs. I didn't do alcohol. I wasn't smoking cigarettes anymore, things like that. And we were married for 7 years, no kids. Went through a terrible divorce, and then I got right back on the drugs again and the alcohol. I was always a functional addict of some sort. I held down a job, I worked, all of that. So all of this went on, and then I ended up dating a girl for about 2 years, and she overdosed and died, unfortunately, from drugs. Found her in my apartment. That was really terrible experience, and still feel really bad that happened, and it was just terrible. But she had a lot worse problems than I did in those areas. And after that, it was funny. I met my wife. She was working in a restaurant, and I met her. She was bartending actually at a bar. Sorry, and she started being friends with me. And she's going through a bad marriage and getting out of one. And we were friends for a good 2 or 3 years. She gave me a lot of advice. She's a little bit older. Kind of just helped me to kind of think more positively about myself. And so afterwards, after her divorce, we ended up dating, and then we ended up getting married. And that was 2013 that we started dating, and then ended up getting married. I still wasn't a Christian. I was an agnostic. I just didn't know, and didn't really have as much hatred for God as I first did, but I just was like, I don't want to hear anything about this religion stuff or anything. So got a phone call after I was married for a little while. My grandmother, who was, this was about 3.5 years ago, or a little over 3 years ago, not quite 3.5 years ago. My grandmother had fallen at 95 years old and broken her hip. And this is my Jehovah's Witness grandmother that I loved, that I was attached to very strongly, that I had not spoken to in like 17 years, hardly at all. So I go up there, and I've got my wife this time with me, my wife right now. And I basically go up there, and I see my grandmother there sick, and basically she was probably not going to make it. And all the Jehovah's Witnesses are coming to visit her. And they have these unspoken rules, like you're allowed to say something to an excommunicated or a disfellowship person if it's a family thing, and you can basically tell them your condolences and things like that. So I had these Jehovah's Witnesses that I'd known my entire life, that some of them that were older, that used to play with me and bounce me on their knee, and give me candy at the congregations and things like that. Go out in field service together, just very well known because I was the presiding overseer's son. I have these people coming up to me, and the most they can say to me is just like, hey, sorry that your grandmother's in the hospital. And one or two of them did actually carry on a conversation, but for the most part, that was the reception that I got. But yet they talked to my wife. They talked her ears off because they were trying to evangelize her, which was hilarious in a way. And at the time, my wife had been taking me to kind of to her church. She's Indonesian, so I'd been going and hearing these sermons in Indonesia, and they were getting translated to me. But I just was going because, it was something that she wanted me to do. So I say this mangled prayer close to my grandmother's death, and I call it a mangled prayer because it really was. I was just like, God, if you're real and everything, I know they're not right. I know the Jehovah's Witnesses are not truth. Could you show my grandmother who you are before you die? And then it hit me that I don't know who God is. I didn't know anything about God. Here I am making a prayer to someone that I don't even know. And so my grandmother died, and immediately I went home and I started studying. And YouTube's the best thing of this generation. So I started looking up videos on YouTube. So what would happen is I would find all these videos from former Jehovah's Witnesses giving their testimonies, and I started relating to that. And I was like, this is exactly how I feel. This is the exact experience I've had. And, you'd see so many similar stuff. It was very therapeutic. And then you get the atheist, and the atheist, I would say 95% of Jehovah's Witnesses that leave turn to atheism, and the other kind of go into some kind of weird made up religious type beliefs or philosophies, a lot of new agey type stuff and things like that. So I'm listening to all this stuff, and then God's providence again, Dr. Walter Martin's old tapes from the 1980s come up. And so I listened to everything Dr. Walter Martin had to say on Jehovah's Witnesses. And as I was listening to him, he was using scripture, and he was refuting everything that the Jehovah's Witnesses teach, all their false doctrines from scripture. And I'm sitting there listening to this, and I'm like, I know this. He's wrong. And so I'm like trying to figure out from my Bible how I can, prove him wrong. And I'm trying to basically debate with, Dr. Walter Martin passed in the 80s. I'm trying to debate a dead guy, and I'm getting animated at the screen. I'm kind of even sometimes yelling at the screen like, no, that's not true. That's not true. But during that time period, God was shaping me, and he was changing my heart. And the truth was sinking in, and it was being received. And I heard the gospel from Dr. Walter Martin, and I immediately just kind of had this sense of how sinful I was and all the things I'd done in my life, and then what Christ did for us on the cross. Now, I didn't believe in the cross at the time, but let's just say the tree, on the tree, and really it doesn't matter. But just kind of started to realize who I was compared to who God was, and that I really, all these times that I was a Jehovah's Witness and I felt like I had no hope to ever be able to please Jehovah. It's true. We don't have any hope to please God. None of our righteous works. They're all filthy rags, as Isaiah 64:6 says. All have fallen short of the glory of God and sinned, as Romans 3 says. And all of this stuff just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I repented of my sins, confessed Jesus Christ, and I believe that I was born again before that. That's my soteriology, but I was born again. I had a changed heart. And so then from there, I was really scared to grab any false teaching. And the church we were going to, I didn't understand a lot with the Indonesian church, and I was scared to listen to pastors online. I'd always been told by my parents that, in the Jehovah's Witnesses, that the pastors, or that the mainstream Christianity was devil and false worship and all that stuff. So it was really hard for me, and I didn't want to get misled. So I just listened to everything Dr. Walter Martin had. If it was about Catholics, I was listening to it. If it was about New Age cult, I was listening to it. Whatever it was, I would listen to it. And I would listen to it hundreds of times, not each episode, but like I probably listened to hundreds of different audio clips that he had done from his teaching series and various things. And then one day, YouTube suggested Dr. James White and his video on Jehovah's Witnesses. And so I started to listen to him. And I still have on my wall a bunch of Post-it notes. They call it the will, I believe, but it's basically all of the titles and names attributed to Yahweh in the Old Testament, also attributed to Jesus in the New Testament. And I worked the Trinity out with some other scriptures from listening to Dr. James White debates and lectures on the Trinity and the deity of Christ. Of course, you get the deity of Christ first, and then the Trinity comes kind of later as far as understanding and learning it. But I knew Jesus was God pretty quickly. And then, of course, the Trinity took a little while longer to kind of get. But I listened to every Dr. White debate on the deity of Christ, defending the Trinity and all of that. And then I just listened to everything that he had because I felt like I could trust his material. So in the end, I would say I've got at least 1,000 hours of listening to Dr. White and kind of training under him. And of course, I branched out to other people. I listened to R.C. Sproul. I listened to Sproul. I listened to Paul Washer. I listened to Vodi Bakum, John Piper. I listened to various other people, John MacArthur, and the various teachers. And so I've just kind of, ever since then, I was spending 3-4 hours a day studying. And ever since then, except for as of recently, I had spent quite a bit of time during my week basically listening to sermons and debates and other things, and just learning and reading and studying the Word and reading books. I have a lot of books back here that are not Jehovah's Witness books. So
hearing that, you can tell where the gospel theology is obviously it's vital, and just hearing how you went from when you were holding to the tenets of your previous faith and it study and works were more seem motivated on duty. And as you're even speaking about your conversion or that time when you're beginning to personally experience this regenerate life, it's that gospel of grace that motivates duty. It's the delight coming from a heart of delight, just seeking out who the nature and character of God is, and just seeing that it all hinges, like you're mentioning, on the gospel.
Amen.
Understanding the gospel turns duty into delight, and it can be because of the grace of God, right?
Yeah, and if I think back about the Jehovah's, it was never enjoyable
Mm-hmm.
of the duties. Now, when I engage in ministry, it's something that I love. I love to tell people about Christ, whether it's just a simple conversation over coffee or whether it's actually going out to the abortion mill and doing street preaching, whether it's doing evangelism out on the street, passing out tracts. It can be hard. Don't get me wrong. You can meet resistance and people can get upset at you and cuss you out and spit at you and things like that. And sometimes there's the whole feeling back from when I was younger, we're being persecuted for God's name. Well, yeah, you are. But back then it was you're being persecuted for following after an organization.
Yeah.
And so it's just so much different. But, this is the problem with all the cults and all of the false religions is they're all works-based and you can never do enough.
Yes, I was just going to say, a lot of what you're talking about too is this idea that you study scripture, you see God's grace as it's an unconditional love, that chesed, that covenantal love is unconditional, Abrahamic, Davidic, and New Covenant. And you don't have unconditional love with cults,
No.
a God of unconditional love. And the only reason we can have this Christians is because we have a God that actually was crucified and bore our sin and absorbed the wrath in our place. So now we've been set free. There is none of that.
Yeah.
That's one thing I looked at. We can get into it in the when we get back together and talk more theology. Hopefully that's.
Yeah, I would love to see just both of you guys go at it. That'd be really fun.
This is a part of that I found was most. It was just interesting is Russell's views on atonement.
Right.
It really right there. I was like, this is. I mean, the gospel is there's no gospel. There's no good news. But I don't want to go into the details on it. But I noticed there that his view of this more objective rectifying of Adam's transgression, and then
so they hold to a form of ransom theory. We'll just go really quickly into it. We won't spend much time on it. They reject penal substitutionary atonement. And if you notice, most cults and most false religions on some level reject penal substitutionary atonement.
He seemed to also throw in Grotius's governmental theory of atonement too.
He does.
It's like this. He kind of created a quasi of that, or bring it.
Create a mismatch of stuff. I think I don't know if I have it up here, but I have a book. Well, we'll look it up later, but I have one of his books that has a lot on the atonement, but I haven't read it in a while.
Yeah.
But
I got mine right here. I don't want to touch it again, though.
Yeah, those are over 100 years old, the one that I was touching, but they're in pretty good condition until you open them up and start flipping through them, and the pages are kind of old.
Well, I'm getting really excited about our next little get together. Cool. Awesome. Well, hey, that was absolutely amazing to hear your story fleshed out a little bit more, Nathan, and I can't wait to have you on again. Any final thoughts, guys, before we wrap this up?
Well, I would just real quick say about my story. I mean, every bit of it is by the grace of God. I mean, there were so many times in my past life that I shouldn't be here, and without His mercy and grace, no one can stand and no one can be saved. And everything, my entire story is all a demonstration that He used in my life for me that I hope will bless others.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, it's been a blessing hearing you and hearing what you shared. And I think this is definitely going to be impactful for a lot of the viewers. So we really are grateful for you taking the time to share. Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah. It's been really
thank
good.
you so much.
Cool. Hey, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening to X Garage. Tune in with us next week. Same time, same places across the internets or whenever you feel like it. Doesn't really matter. All right. Have a good one, everyone.
X Garage.
X Garage.
X Garage.
X Garage.